Okay, last and but definitely not least is political participation three, the elitist theory. This theory is, I might say, making a comeback. And if you're interested in this theory, I think you should really be looking at what's called critical theory or critical race theory. Um, Let me just kind of start off with the basics. The elitist theory accepts that decision making should be left to the experts, the wealthy who own the most land and run businesses. Just ask the Trump supporters, uh, Elon Musk, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Bill Gates, right? You can go through the list. Um, you might call this like the cult of the celebrity. Um, I it's critical of the position that elites run everything, but it accepts that as the reality that the majority must believe that this is the way things are supposed to be run. So, C. Wright Mills argues for this in The Power Elite, but it's been recurring, and especially now. So the idea is that the elites really have figured out ways of controlling your interests and my interests by controlling the economy and by shaping our needs and wants. And so elitism becomes so pervasive that we might not even realize that we're falling for it. And so the critical theory here, or the criticism that C. Wright Mills is putting forward, is saying let's pull this out and look at this, these facts. So this is pretty telling. And you can kind of see even like a progression here, right? Where Donald Trump would be the least of the elites, right? Because he comes from a school in Pennsylvania, as opposed to going to the more prestigious elite schools like Harvard and Yale. The idea is that essentially corporate interests are controlling the government. And a lot of people believe this, right? And so it's I don't think I need to explain too much further there. The stubborn facts, though, are this theory fails to take into consideration the role power of resistance. If Trump and other elites are controlling the world, how do you explain these two protests, right? You've got the insurrection, which are Trump supporters, and then Black Lives Matter, which are largely protesting against people like Trump. And so if elites were accepted to control the world and were expected to be in charge, you wouldn't see any protests. So the theory doesn't quite explain that very well. There are some attempts, and I read a recent article by a law professor that I think was very, I'm still working my way through it and processing it. But she's largely arguing it's based in this theory of contracts, right? And so people might protest, but nothing really changes. So you might think that a contract that you have with, say, a cell phone provider or the cable company is unfair. You might protest that. You might make a sign. You might go to a march. But nothing really fundamentally changes because the elites have all the power in that relationship. So it's hard to measure role power, especially for resistors, and that's it's not something that this theory even tries to do. Elites need legitimation to govern without rebellion, and so I might jump to the second question here. If the gap is too large, are we due for another violent revolution? So in other words, are these four things that are on the screen here, the racism pandemic, the healthcare pandemic, and the economy pandemic, are these leading to this revolt or this revolution, rebellion, and is this what the Trump supporters are sensing, right? So, in other words, if C. Wright Mills is correct, and the elites have taken over the world or whatever, then that might have become, they've gone too far, in other words. And so this might be a pattern that repeats itself throughout history when people become aware that the elites are using things like government, education, healthcare to further their own interests. So, there's a way of thinking about this where elitism, even though it doesn't take into consideration resistance, where you could start to think about how resistance leads to a change in elitism. So the basics that you want to memorize is that the elitist theory presupposes a ruling class. Among this class, there are winners and losers. which is largely why people like Donald Trump talked like that. The theory presumes that most people are rather dumb and have servile minds, that they get their ideas from media, entertainment, and other forms of what's called hegemony. So much so that they act against their own interests. They support celebrities, corporations, and the American dream, even though that actually hurts them. And in a simple equation, B, the powerless are unaware of the domination of A, and so the elite, or B, simply can't do anything to resist A, right? So, that's the problem with this theory for me, is that it kind of presupposes that a ruling class is the way it should be. And so that screams of kind of the old aristocracy, or the king's rule by divine right, or even the idea of an oligarchy as like a fixed thing that never changes. Again, there's so much resistance and rebellion going on, not to mention like the shadow market where people aren't really following the rules. Or if you look at like the mafia in southern Italy, where there's like a whole second system there. It doesn't explain enough here. So it kind of falls for both predictability and parsimony, which is why the theory isn't widely used. It's making a comeback, I think, because the obviousness of elites, right? And how popular this theory is among average people, which is ironic if you really think about it, because on the one hand, it's a very acknowledged theory from average people or ordinary folks that the elites run the world. But then it also seems to prove, the idea that, well, then why are so many ordinary folks, so obsessed with things like their Instagram account and following celebrities, right? So celebrities would be elites that are ruining the world, right? But on the other hand, people love them. So it's a complicated theory, but it's not a bad place to start, right? If you want to start unpacking some of the problems in government.